Greetings, I'm Jeff Carter with Seattle CityClub. I go by he, him, and I'd like to welcome you to this virtual Civic Bootcamp, Women in Action, Leadership Towards an Equitable Pandemic Economy, and our webinar on women's leadership in business and entrepreneurship. Just so you know, Seattle CityClub is a small nonprofit with a big mission to strengthen our community through conversations on critical issues like this one and encourage civic engagement. We also encourage healthy dialogue and hope that everyone will abide by the common standards of web etiquette. So with that, I would like to welcome our moderator, Louise Chernin, past president and CEO of the Greater Seattle Business Association, who will kick off the conversation. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks very much. And thanks everybody for CityClub inviting me. I'm really thrilled to be here with this very dynamic group of women who are movers and shakers in our community. They're leaders. They do important work and they get us to think and hopefully to act. And I'm looking forward today to have a good discussion and also encourage all of us to find ways then we can get more involved. So I thought instead of me introducing everybody, we'll let you hear directly from these amazing leaders in our community. So first I'm going to ask Andrea Caupain, who is the president or the CEO of Byrd Barr Place, to tell us a little bit about herself and her agency, just a little bit.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you all today. I'm Andrea Caupain Sanderson, the CEO of Byrd Barr Place. Byrd Barr Place is a historically Black human services organization located in Seattle that was created during the Civil Rights Movement. I'm also co-founder of the Black Future Co-op Fund, the first philanthropic fund of its kind created in Washington State to fund Black organizations, as well as the co-founder of the BIPOC Executive Directors Coalition, and a coalition that was created to deepen solidarity between Black, Indigenous, and other people of color serving organizations across the state, as well as to build this unified agenda around resourcing our BIPOC organizations. And from a philanthropic and public sector funding perspective, I'm glad to be here with you today.
Thanks, Andrea. Not that you have too much on your plate or anything. It sounds pretty amazing. Next, I would love to hear from Dr. Janice Green, who is president and CEO of another amazing organization, Webec Pacific.
Hi, thank you all for having me here and inviting me to be on this panel with these amazing forward-thinking women. My name is Janice Green, and I'm the president of Women's Business Enterprise Council Pacific, or WeBet Pacific. And WeBet Pacific supports women business owners and entrepreneurs looking to build their business, enhance their knowledge, and expand their networks. And they grow their revenue through contracts with large corporations, government agencies, and other women-owned businesses. So we are a regional partner with a larger national organization called Women's Business Enterprise Council. We operate in a 6-state region: Alaska, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Northern California. And there are about, there's over 900, probably 900, between 900 and 950 women-owned businesses certified in our region, with about coming close to $8 billion worth of revenue. And they employ about 3,200 people. And that's solely in our region. So we're looking to, again, we really look at women businesses. We look across the board and we look to engage larger corporations, women businesses, and everyone in the ecosystem to do business with women-owned businesses.
Thank you, Janice. We're going to get back to hear more about that because I think it would be great for people to understand about being certified as a women-owned business. Next, we're really delighted to have today a representative, Tana Senn, with us, and I'll let her introduce herself. She's our representative from the 41st.
Thanks, Louise. It's wonderful to be here with Andrea and Janice, and thanks, Jeff. So my name is Tana Senn. I'm state representative from the 41st District, which includes Renton, Newcastle, Mercer Island, Bellevue, and parts of Issaquah, Sammamish, and all of Beaux Arts Village. And in the legislature, I serve as chair of the Children, Youth, and Families Committee. And I also serve on the Appropriations Committee, which is our budget committee, so helping make all the money decisions. And on the Local Government Committee, because as I mentioned, I represent 6 cities. I also serve on the board of HopeLink, which is a community agency helping folks struggling economically, and I'm the co-president of the National Association of Jewish Legislators. In the legislature, I've really focused on women's issues and children's issues, and they tend to intersect quite a bit. So passing the first update to our equal pay laws in 75 years was one of my original accomplishments in the legislature, and now recently passed the Fair Start for Kids Act, which is a huge investment in childcare, which is critical to get women on their feet and back into work and economically secure. Thrilled to be here.
Thank you, Representative Senn. So a lot of people always ask me, how did you get to where you were, and how did you, I was part of an LGBTQ business chamber and did a lot of work around supply diversity and equity and small business. And people always wonder, how did you get to where you are? So we have these three amazingly accomplished women, and I'd love you to share, like, what inspired you? Did you always decide I'm going to work on social justice or equity issues? What about your own personal lived experience encouraged you to take the path that you did to get to where you are today? So, let's see, Dr. Greene, why don't we start with you, Janice?
Sure. Well, my first inspiration really came from my parents and my grandma, my aunties, my family. A big inspiration for me, because what they did is still instill, sense of self-worth, a sense of history, and they really encouraged me to keep the faith, because I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and we moved to Everett for my dad to be at Painfield, and this was not the most welcoming, inclusive place back then. And being both Black and female, it had its own combinations of challenges, but I learned to navigate kind of in a different way and learn to stay safe and hopefully not to succumb to trauma. So that was a big inspiration to me. And the other huge inspiration for me was I came up in the 60s and 70s. It was a very political era, civil rights, women liberation, anti-war. And so people, to me, were really starting to speak truth to power and stand for their causes. And I got out and started protesting and wanting change. And I don't think I ever stopped. I still want change.
Mm-hmm. And we certainly need it. So we're glad you're still keeping on with that. So Representative Senn, what about you? What in your background, how did you always think I'm going to go into the legislature? I'm going to use my passion in elected office. How'd you get to where you are?
I didn't. I wanted to be a teacher. And so I was studying to become a teacher, and I got involved with a policy organization, the Network of Educators on Central America, and started learning more about policy barriers and policy issues around education. And then that led me to urban planning issues and understanding how the built environment affects the safety of kids and hunger and people getting to work and getting to school. So I got my master's in public policy and administration, studying a lot of urban policy and also women's economic issues and gender issues. And then actually after a decade of working in communications, mainly with foundations and nonprofits, and government relations for them as well, I noticed there was a road safety issue in my community, that people on the council were complaining that if we changed the road, it would slow commuters down by 30 seconds. And meanwhile, families, kids, dogs, teenagers were getting hit and injured on the road. And there were 7 white men on the city council. And I thought, you know what? There are some different perspectives in our community. They're not being reflected. So I helped some women get on the council, and then I joined the Mercer Island City Council, and soon headed to the state legislature, where I've been for 8 years in order to work more on environmental issues, education, gun safety, and other issues like that.
Thank you. Very important issues, and we certainly have more to deal with. So Andrea, tell us about you. You are an incredible activist in the community. You're involved in so many different things, but what in your background brought you here, whether it be lived experiences or people you knew, or how did you arrive at Byrd Barr Place, as well as all the other organizations you are a part of the founding group of?
Yeah, having been raised similar to what Dr. Greene said, having been raised by my grandmother, who I felt was a trailblazer in her time. I was raised in a third world country. I was brought up in the Caribbean, came here when I was 12. But before I came here, I immigrated here. I watched my grandmother work in service to others, others who she felt were much less fortunate than we were, which was hard to believe when I was young, as we were fairly poor. But my grandmother worked with an organization called the Associated Country Women of the World, traveling to other third world nations, teaching women how to be self-sufficient. And she did this in a time when women's lib was frowned upon. So watching my grandmother pursue her work against what were all odds, you can think of a person who had very little, who was raising her grandchildren as a single mom herself. And in a time when men in our society weren't too keen on the ideas that she was instilling on women, right? Daring to dream of having a career, she was teaching them about earning their own money and managing their own money, etc. And so even though she's no longer with us, she inspires me, right? The life that she lived inspires me and has informed my career path, which is to work in service to others, to create better opportunities for marginalized communities and people. When I was at Camp Meridian High School, a teacher sort of who really took a liking to me and supported me, felt I needed to go to the Evergreen State College in Olympia because he understood that I wanted to study political science. I wanted to in some way be a public servant and give back to this community that was now my home. And so I went to Evergreen. I got my undergrad degree there. I got my graduate degree in public administration. I worked in the state legislature, and I was very fortunate to be able to work for the 37th district, which is where I live now. And being at the state capitol, which I know Representative Senn knows all about, and being there to help craft and support policy that you can see on the ground how it would shift opportunities and be meaningful to people in a real way, was where I needed to be. But then I also got the opportunity to come to this organization 18 years ago to watch those policies that I supported when I was in Olympia as a legislative aide be sort of put into practice. And the organization I'm with now helped us to do that, right? To really be in some way supportive of people moving their lives, economic mobility, whether it was health equity, whether it was criminal justice, in some way being able to be a part of improving others' lives. And so I'm fortunate to be in the career I am, but also, again, inspired by my grandmother and her modeling of her life and her life's work to me.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I mean, clearly, many of you have mentioned that your mother's or grandmother's or family member really was important in setting the path for you. So, Dr. Greene, do you think that women have a different perspective around leadership?
I absolutely think women have a different perspective. Women are a more inclusive. Most of the women, and I work with a lot of women business owners, and although they may be competitors, they're collaborators. They reach out, they help each other through a lot of difficulties, especially this last couple of years during the pandemic. So we've actually seen a growth in our women business enterprises, and largely because of the network and the stability of the network and the fact that you do have other women with you to give you guidance, to help you, to make sure that you're in the right place at the right time and share information. So having worked at Boeing for a long time, there's a very different sense. I had a very different sense when I left that organization and went into this organization, and the way that women really lift each other up time after time. They're there to lift each other up.
I certainly find that as well. So what about you, Andrea, and then you, Representative Senn? What do you think about women in leadership, and are they the same as leadership by men or men who identify as men, or do you feel women have a different perspective when they lead?
Yeah, I think that in general, leaders are taught to, problem solve and perform tasks, but it's beyond that now, especially today, right? It's about being more relational. It's about having these other qualities around being humble and thinking outside of yourself and outside of your accomplishments, and thinking of togetherness and the accomplishment of the team and of the whole. I've seen a lot of women leaders around me model that. I've seen how teams have thrived with this way of thinking about leadership, especially servant leadership, right? You're there to support the success of others. You're there to support the success of the whole. It's not about yourself. And again, deeply humbling humility is what I've seen a lot of the women leaders around me exude. And this idea of being grateful for, even if it's the simplest thing, that really can empower and motivate the teams around you to go further and to really take chances and do those things that we need to do, especially in a pandemic world, right? To take chances, to jump out there, to solve issues. I think women have been at the forefront of that.
Thank you. And it hasn't been easy. So talk about getting to the forefront, Representative Senn. It took us a long time to get some women in the legislature. And although we do better in Washington state, we certainly know in Congress or in other states around the country or worldwide, although even more so in this country, women have to really kick and scratch to get into that body of still mostly white straight men. So what do you think about women's leadership? Like, how has it changed as our legislature brought more women into position of powers? I mean, we have a Speaker of the House now that's a woman. So tell us something about that.
Yeah, Washington State is pretty amazing. Right now we have 50% of the House Democratic Caucus are women, which is really exciting. When I started 8 years ago, I was one of the only women with elementary school children or young children. And that has also changed dramatically. And I think one of the key things about women's leadership is just they also bring different lived experiences. And that is what has been so powerful and special about this past legislative session. We had more people of color, more women of color, and just more women to bring the challenges that traditionally didn't really get a lot of attention. Why did it, people are like, how did you pass and why did you pass this gender pay equity bill? Well, frankly, other people were focused on other issues. When women bring their lived experience, their juggling, their challenges, whether it's maternal health, it's mental health, it's childcare, frankly, the perspective of transportation, and not just about commute or moving goods and services, but being late to pick up your child from daycare and the challenges and the stress of that, safe routes to school, just so many issues that are about in the unique perspective that women have. And that's really important. And we have seen huge strides in our policy shifts, passing paid family and sick and parental leave, passing childcare legislation, more work around reducing maternal health and postpartum depression, or improving maternal health, reducing maternal health disparities. And a lot of that is because of women leaders. And I think people are starting to stand up and really say, there used to be the reputation that it was hard for women to fundraise or to get out there. And I think the community is really coming together that we've needed some new types of leadership, new people we can trust, who we can admire, who we can relate to. And as Andrea said, who have empathy. And I think that is a key characteristic that has been missing in our society and something that we need to continue to teach our children, but that really being able to put yourself in other people's shoes is really a key component of leadership and women's leadership that I think is so valuable.
Absolutely, thank you. I mean, I think as we see, when we can make our places that we make decisions in more diverse, we get more perspectives. I don't know why anybody's afraid of that, because we certainly haven't done very well solving the problems that exist now with keeping everybody looking the same and having the same backgrounds. So I'm going to switch a little bit to economic issues right now. So as Andrea, as your clients, as the community you work with are dealing with pandemic issues, such serious issues right now, how do you let us know what is it that these issues around the pandemic have been different for communities of color, especially for the Black and other BIPOC communities of color? What has been different for them in the pandemic?
You know, it's really deepening dimensionally of the same issues that's plagued us in our BIPOC communities, especially in our Black communities. While we've always seen this trend of lack of economic security, it's become alarming since COVID-19, these overwhelming rates of BIPOC people living in poverty in our communities throughout Washington state. We even now see it in rural white communities, right? And it's becoming so reoccurring that we fear that what's happened, its pronounced nature and with COVID, will put people at risk for falling into poverty permanently. You know, so we're concerned about people's health equity and life expectancy and having access to good health care, but also quality health care. Where, you know, Representative Senn talked about maternal mortality. We were looking at that pre-COVID with our Black mothers who suffered from a really high rate of deaths during childbirth or preterm births. And that's something that, again, has become much more pronounced with COVID. We've seen where our Black people in Washington state tend to hold the 10 lowest paid jobs in Washington state. And these are low-wage jobs that have gone away since the pandemic, right? And so we fear that how do people really create for themselves, and how does the system create for people to achieve economic mobility when you see these statistics, when you see this reality? At Byrd Place, we were created to support people with their basic needs, right? So we're providing for people's rental assistance. We're providing for, in the summertime, cooling their homes, but then in the winter, warming their homes, keeping their lights on, providing for food. But then what is on the horizon? How do we provide for people to earn a livable wage, save some of those earnings, build wealth is what we're thinking about now. We're thinking about criminal justice, right? We saw with the killing of George Floyd. How do we look at how our community and our law enforcement begin to work together in this new way of being in community together? We think about the education system. A lot of our children are falling behind. Before COVID, our Black third graders were not reaching third grade knowing how to read, right? Our high schoolers were not graduating on time. And when our high schoolers did graduate, they were not ready to earn a livable wage or go to college. And then it just compounds, right? We think about, again, life expectancy before COVID in Washington state is 80 years, but for a Black Washingtonian and other BIPOC people, it was 76 years. And 15 years leading up to her death, we tended to lose our quality of life. So Byrd Place is not only providing for people's direct needs right now, immediate needs, but also we're looking to how do we solve for systemically moving the needle forward in a positive direction for our BIPOC communities and moving it further forward after COVID, which has been a challenge, but it isn't impossible. So I thank you for that question, but a lot of our work is around downstream, helping people where they are now, but then upstream, we're talking about post-COVID. How do we really truly help people catapult forward from those statistics?
Thanks, Andrea. I'm thinking as you say all these things, yes, some of these things have been going on for generations and generations. And suddenly everyone has noticed this. And certainly the pandemic has exacerbated everything, because when you're poor or you're a person of color, things are worse: healthcare, education, access to technology. Do you really feel now that people are having these, what they think of as their own aha moment, whether it's a legislator or whatever, do you think they're actually going to work to change things?
I do.
Just recognize it.
I do. I think people are listening differently now. People have heard me say this before, that COVID has shown us all that when we all do better, we all do better. And so I am across sectors, corporate sector, nonprofit, grassroots, our public sector. People are softening towards each other. They're willing to sit and have the conversation about where can we pitch in to support one another, because we have one community. It's a Washington state community, right? It's not the business community, the public sector community, the government community, whatever. It's community where we all need to work, live, play, worship, learn. And we've all got to have a point of accountability in that community. So I do see an opening where people are willing to listen. And I think that willingness will lead to change.
Okay, let's hope so. So Dr. Greene, you work with the small business owner very often. You're working around economic development. So during this pandemic, do you think that women-owned, whether they be certified or women-owned small businesses, do you think that they fared differently? They were differently impacted by the pandemic?
Yes, I do. I absolutely think they were differently impacted. We do know that women businesses have less access to capital generally, and that extended into the pandemic. When it came time to get the emergency loans, like the PPP loans, women were definitely impacted, and people of color were definitely impacted. They didn't have necessarily the same type of banking relationships. So we learned over time that those banking relationships are very important, and we need to know which banks to go to. We found that smaller businesses do better with local banks, local community type banks, unless they have a great banking relationship already established. We lost a lot of businesses. I mentioned before that we went up in headcount, but we did lose a lot of businesses depending on what industry they were in. So those folks that were in restaurants and food industry, event planning, some of them took it right away, pivoted and did something different. So we saw a lot of the event companies going and figuring out how to be virtual. We saw our food companies figuring out how they could do it more commercially, where they package their food and mailed it out. So, and there are varieties of ways that women were impacted, because women were at home and they're business owners and their children are at home with them. There was no daycare. I think daycare is critical across the board for all women, women and men, parents, let's put it like that, if they're going to remain in the workforce or if they're going to run their businesses. So there were a lot of things that impacted people. All of a sudden, those folks that were high touch, and big part of their marketing was, the lunch, the face-to-face, had to figure out how to do that virtually. But I think one of the biggest obstacles was the financing, the access to capital. And again, that's not something that's new. It's always been there. But with the pandemic, it was exacerbated. It was really visible, and people were starting to complain, especially when the first one came out. The first, the EIDL loan and the PPP, those loans came out, and smaller businesses and women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses were pretty much left in the lurch on those. So, yes.
Yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own experience working with small businesses in GSBA is that many of the small businesses don't have a business bank that they work with all the time. And so they didn't have their banker that said, well, I'll help you figure out that application. And in fact, some of them only went to their clients first. So if you were not a client, and then suddenly, I mean, it was pretty dramatic how even banking, which we think is an application, this is going to be objective, but of course it wasn't. It was set up already that certain people would not, even though the money was there for everybody, certain people would not have the access, or the applications were fairly complex, and the financial questions. And we know small business owners, they don't have HR departments, finance departments, this department. They are the one-stop shop. They have to figure it all out. So yeah. I certainly can see that.
I think the CDFIs came in. I think that any small business should make sure that they understand the CDFIs and the roles that they play. We have Business Impact Northwest here and some other ones, and I think that's a critical piece.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, I know Ventures help some people's Business Impact Northwest. Absolutely. And some of the community banks reach out also to people. So Representative Senn, you sit on a number of committees. You chair the Children, Youth, and Families Committee, and you're on the Local Government Committee, and you hear all these challenges of small business. Now, I used to say our state government did very little for small business. We all say it's wonderful, it's important, but I truly believe until the pandemic, nobody realized that the collapse of small business could collapse the economy. And, I think it was shocking to people. And even though they sort of said it, but I don't think we actually understood it. So the state government is trying to do certain things, but what you sitting on these committees are going to have been addressing and are going to address in terms of access to affordable childcare, as well as support for small businesses?
Great question. Small businesses really are such a critical backbone to our economy. And as you said, we really saw that, whether it was, a restaurant, a local store, a supplier, as they were struggling, the whole economy struggled. As a legislature, we've seen a number and done a number of things. As Dr. Greene was mentioning, some of the financial and capital struggles are actually examples of systemic racism. And, we as a legislature recognize that. And in our capital dollars, where we give out money for capital projects, we started giving planning grants, and we started giving more technical assistance so that smaller organizations, smaller businesses could apply and help develop their project, because they didn't have those traditional skills, whether they didn't have that in-house skill or they just weren't familiar with it. So really taking an eye and looking at that. During the pandemic, we made sure that we waived registration fees or licensing fees for small businesses. We changed some of our alcohol rules to make sure that we were helping restaurants survive, because they have large margins around that. So we really, had some small business loans that above and beyond what the federal government provided. So we had a real emphasis on small businesses during this COVID time, which unfortunately has not ended. And frankly, a critical component of that really was around, and continues to be around, childcare. I often call this recession that we were seeing the she-cession, because it was women who lost a significant number of the jobs. We were back to 1988 hiring levels for women. I mean, that's 40 years of hiring advances erased, and just from COVID times. And a huge portion of that is because schools were closed. And so children were home and childcares were struggling. And, frankly, that's continued certainly through the summer, while people were blaming unemployment benefits as a reason why people weren't going back to work. I just kept pointing to, it was bad during the pandemic when kids were at least occupied by online school. But during the summer, and they didn't have school and they didn't have a place to go, parents were really struggling, especially women were really struggling to get back, especially into a field where maybe they had unpredictable schedules or they had non-traditional hours. And we've really recognized the importance of childcare from 0 to 12. Can't leave that 9-year-old home alone, even if they're doing their homework and on virtual school. And so it really opened people's eyes to the struggle. Maybe the one benefit of Zoom, frankly, is that we've had a look into people's homes. And as people are working, you see the kids in the background, you see, the family struggles, and not just of the moms, not just of people who you would traditionally think of having kind of childcare struggles, but executives and managers and directors. And so it really brought it to the fore that we're all in this boat together, and this is a struggle for everyone. And for me, working on childcare was not only that critical way to help women and get back in the workforce, and to, we had amazing business allies who were raising their hands saying, there is no economic recovery without childcare. And they were seeing it, and it was really, really true. And, and frankly, from the equity point of view, first of all, most of the childcare providers are women and women of color. And so by supporting the childcare industry, we're supporting women and women of color and women business owners. And we're getting women back to work, and we're keeping our kids developing well. So it just was really like this, kind of trifecta of key critical policy issues that we were looking at and working on. And, our work isn't going to end, but we certainly made great strides, and really applaud our community for coming together, and our small businesses for hanging in there and continuing to be such a creative and critical part of our economy.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Senn. So both of you also jump in, Dr. Greene and Andrea, because, okay, we've noticed this, childcare is essential. It's so phenomenally expensive. I don't know how anybody, I always did nonprofit work. I don't know how anybody affords it, and especially single parents, and you can't even try to stay home. So we've recognized this. We've had a lot of childcare workers leave the industry because it's so underpaid and because their health was so compromised. And then they had to watch their own children, and they brought, possibly were exposed to COVID and brought that home to their families that were very vulnerable. So we know all this information now. I know more money and laws are going into place to make it more accessible. I don't exactly know what that means, but I want to know, how are we going to bring back childcare workers and pay them enough so that they can take care of their families? I feel like our country is so behind other countries in terms of recognizing that childcare is part of the economic fabric of running everything, whether it's our schools, our healthcare system, or whatever. What are we going to actually do to recruit more childcare workers, pay them reasonably well, and yet not charge a gazillion dollars to families who cannot afford the childcare? It's great that business says, oh my God, I recognize how important this is. I can't believe they're finally recognizing it because it's like been out there forever. But what are we going to do to actually address that? And right now, there are very few childcares. There's huge waiting lists.
I certainly can give Andrea and Janice a little break there, in that it's really so multifaceted. And that's what the beauty of Fair Start for Kids Act was all about, was really addressing so many components of it. We were helping provide dollars to pay for healthcare premiums for childcare providers. We were increasing subsidy rates, which is the pay for childcare that accept from lower income and middle income families. We are expanding the eligibility of families who were getting subsidized care, because childcare is more expensive than college. And so more and more people need those financial supports. We were recognizing that dual language programs and the skills of trauma-informed care, or being able to work with and recognize trauma and behavior issues, is critical and should be rewarded with extra pay, because we want to make sure kids are not kicked out of childcare, which they are, even 13 times more than they are out of elementary school, if you can believe it. So it was really a wholesale approach, providing more capital dollars so that we can expand childcare, providing dollars for professional development for childcare workers so that they don't have to have that out-of-pocket expense, and that it's more locally in their communities and in their native language. So again, it's this whole complex thing. And then what we're seeing on the federal level, blessedly through, frankly, the leadership of Senator Patty Murray, is that there is great attention in the Build Back Better plan and the $3.5 trillion reconciliation plan to invest in childcare. And that is critical. I mean, Washington State is kind of ahead of the game. And yet, if I didn't know any other state, I would say we are, at the back of the bus. But luckily, I think there's a lot of attention nationally that childcare is an issue, not just here, not just from moms, not just from, business people, but across the board. People are recognizing the value of early learning and then the need for it. So I'm hopeful.
Thank you. Andrea, anything you want to add, or Dr. Greene? Andrea first.
Great. Representative Senn said it, right? There needs to be money. There needs to be resources to shift the sector. And policy passes, we hope it does, and it flows through. Then it's up to us on the ground to functionally put it into place. It's reprehensible that caregiving labor is undervalued when it's the most important thing that we can do in our society, right? And I'd say that we're in an era since COVID, we're thinking, we can be thinking differently. We can be thinking collectively as a society about how we want to do things differently in the 21st century for our communities and for humanity. So yeah, here to that.
Yeah, and I think I have a personal example. My daughter, I have a 6-month-old granddaughter, right? And her, she's gorgeous, of course, but her and her husband are having the conversation, because she works, she does counseling, but they're trying to decide whether or not it's worth it for her to go back to work because by the time they pay childcare, they may be out of more pocket for more money. So it's not only, so you're cutting off the workforce, even those that can afford to, they can afford to, to live and to pay and all of that stuff, but you're still making it hard on women in situations. Well, is it worth me going back into the workforce if I have to pay childcare bills? And I think we should, I know this isn't part of the conversation, but I think we should also be having that same consideration for the healthcare workers, the long-term healthcare workers as well, because all of the people that are, as you said, Andrea, essential to caring for people, they're all underpaid and undervalued.
So, Janice, I really think that is an important issue to address. We all say that they're undervalued, they're underpaid. Same thing that I just said about childcare workers or healthcare workers. But what is anybody doing? What about those top paid people? Are they really ready to flip that switch and say, let's start increasing pay to the bottom up instead of the top down? Are they willing to change how we, how we set salaries, how transparent we are to salaries? Do you think we're ready? I mean, we have so acknowledged so many serious issues that have been, as you said, Andrea, daylighted. They're not new. They're just now come, suddenly some people are recognizing this. But do you think we're ready economically to, I'll ask you, Janice, just because you are the one who works with business, small business, yes, but economic development. Are we ready to make that change of what we value and actually then invest in it differently?
I don't know. It'd be my honest answer is I don't know. I think that people know that we need a change, but that would take some people giving up something that they have, right? So the question becomes with the big haves. I mean, people that have billions and millions of dollars don't seem to want to let go of a dollar, right? So it's not collective like it should be. We should collectively be looking at this, as Andrea said. There should be all of us. And seeing what's best for the community, because if you don't take care of everybody in your community, you get what we have out here. We have people homeless. We have people basically starving in our streets. Our kids aren't taken care of. Our schools aren't taken care of. We're not doing very well with the COVID. So, it's on all of us. But I don't know how you change the hearts and the minds of people to get them to give back. Yeah,
I think that's a major question. Well, Andrea, you tried to work around the state in educating people on issues. Not just you do direct service too, but I think you bring up a lot of issues with people. What do you think? Do you think not those who are only affected by the great inequities we have, but those who have the capacity to make the changes? Do you think people are ready to start making any of those changes?
I don't think so. I think people are talking about it. Again, I said earlier, people are deeply listening. But in terms of this particular question, people, as Dr. Greene said, they don't want to be the sacrificial lamb. They don't want to be the first, right? There are a lot of people who have been benefiting from the way things were for a long time pre-COVID. And there's a lot of us that have been burdened by it. But those who are benefiting don't want to lose that benefit. They see it as something going away. They see it as life ending to a degree. So they're fighting like hell to keep things the way they are. So when we're working, those of us who want to see the system shift, when we're working to combat that and they're working to keep things the way they are, is where we're going to see some real tension. It's going to happen, but incrementally. I think that the system is being called on to shift and eventually it will, but we won't see it almost immediately.
Well, and I have a hope and an action. So my hope is that for people having experienced the pandemic and the societal pandemic that has just, wreaked havoc on everything, that people have a little bit more compassion and understanding that people have individual pandemics at various times in their life, whether they are going through a medical issue, they've lost a job, they've lost a loved one, they're struggling with mental health or substance abuse, whatever it is, that people understand that, wow, a pandemic can really hit somebody when they're not expecting it. It's not just because they're, attributing some factor to them, but just because they're human and that's what happens in society. So my hope is that people have a little bit more compassion and understand that personal pandemics happen all the time and that they're more supportive of supporting people while they're struggling. The action, and I think that Louise, you're saying, are people ready? And to Dr. Greene's point, if the wealthy and are ready, they can go out there and make sure they're supporting the capital gains tax that we passed this year. Because frankly, that's a key way that we're going to help make our tax code more, or keep our tax code now more progressive and pay their capital gains tax and support that if that comes up for challenge.
Right. Well, I know this isn't for this discussion, but how about a state income tax? But we'll have to get to that, perhaps at another time. Andrea, I wanted to ask you, you are one of the founding women who started the Black Future Co-op Fund. And the commitment, I believe, in that fund is not just to raise money but to actually change and offer opportunities for generational wealth that have been denied our Black and Brown members of our community, our country. Can you tell us more about that? What you'd like that fund to be, and then also how can we support that?
Yes, thank you. So we created the fund. We're a little over a year old, right after the killing of George Floyd, and we saw this sort of will. We saw people coming together to raise money in response to COVID, which rightly so. But then we saw how much money was raised in about a 48-hour period, just in our region, and we thought, my goodness gracious, we need to be doing something here. We saw our young activists in the streets demanding things of various different groups and sectors to bring about change. And us co-founders felt like we needed to complement what was happening in the streets, complement what was happening there by leaning on philanthropy to make our demands. And out of that work, we created the Black Future Co-op Fund, and to raise an initial $25 million. I'm proud to say we've raised 12.7 so far, but I'm also heartbroken to say that we haven't raised the entire 25 million yet, right? Where's the will of people to give to Black issues and solve issues for Black people in this country? And so while we're a little over a year, and yes, we have not raised the entire 25 million yet, we continue to move forward with the work, right? We gave out our first set of grants to 40 Black-led organizations across the state. We gave them $25,000 each because we know that they're in the streets doing this work. And so we intend to build, as you said, Black generational wealth, health, and well-being, and increase prosperous outcomes for Black people. We know that there's still this 228-year wealth gap between whites and Blacks. And we see the Black Future Co-op Fund as this new paradigm for philanthropy to uplift Black-led solutions to close those gaps across our communities in Washington State. And so we essentially are creating this reckoning, if you will, with philanthropy, right? Because we know since philanthropy's inception in the early 20th century, it's this model that's been based on this power dynamic where donors decide where and when and how they want to give funding. And what we've recognized as co-founders is that only 7.8% of all philanthropic dollars nationally go to organizations of color, much less to Black-led organizations. So the Black Future Co-op Fund is aiming to shift this dynamic. We're also working to do a number of things. We want to confront anti-Blackness that exists in our society. We want to connect our Black communities across the state. There are 311,000 Black Washingtonians living across the state of Washington. We want to build collective power. We also want to promote this more truthful Black narrative about ourselves, about who we are and what our visions and hopes are for our community. We want to be able to tell our own story. We want to invest again in Black-led solutions in our community. So this fund is important because we as Black people want to be free, right? We want to be free from institutional racism. We want to be free to live our whole and healthy lives without white supremacy and all of its ensuing traumas. We have been, I feel like, this ongoing struggle for our lives, this struggle that's been shaped, right, by the history of this country, from stolen labor to state-sanctioned violence to economic segregation. And so this work of the fund is important to us. It's important for us because we want to be liberated, Louise. And when we're liberated, America will be liberated.
I want to say, I never had my other hat. I'm the president of the Snohomish County NAACP, and we actually received one of your grants, and we're very appreciative of that because what it's allowing us to do is doing some financial acumen classes, some financial literacy classes, and some economic development classes. Because I, like you, well, I don't know if you believe this, but I believe this, that the economic development, the economic situation, how people are able to operate with their healthcare, it's like the bottom line. You have to be economically sound before you can take advantage of most opportunities here. So anyway, thank you for that. We do appreciate it.
Well, it's incredible. And please put in the chat, if you can, of how we can support the fund, because it is very important. So I'd also like to go to you, Dr. Green, is you work from a different perspective, all complementary, as opposed to a social service organization, or you're working to empower and bring in more funds and help small women-owned businesses, or not necessarily small, but women-owned businesses be successful. So what are the barriers, and how has certification changed that? I don't know if a lot of people know that you can be certified as a women-owned, a minority-owned, in some places a veteran-owned, in other places it's LGBTQ-owned. But tell us about your certification and why this is so important, and what does it mean when you hold governments and corporations' feet to the fire of how they invest their money?
Okay, there are several certifications. You know, there's a state certification. Seattle has a certification. There's a DOT, DBE certification. So you have several ways that you can certify your business as a woman-owned business. But ours is a national certification, and it's called Women Business Enterprise Women's Business Enterprise National Council. They own the certification, and we administer the certification. The difference is that we do not have caps. One of the things that I find sometimes with like SBA, woman-owned small business, a woman can only earn up to a certain amount. And if she goes over that amount, she's no longer certified in that area. So we tend to want to take women businesses. We have them from under $1 million to billions of dollars. So we want to make sure that women have access and that they grow. And to Andrea's point, we have some programs in place now that specifically address African-American women, because when you start disaggregating the data, when it says women of color, you'll find that African-American women are lower in revenue. So we targeted where the economic need is. But as an organization, we have like 400 at the top level. We have about 400 organizations that are members. In our area, we have Microsoft, T-Mobile, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. So we have great supporters that are members of our organization. What you can do with the certification, and I tell the women this because most of them are extremely well run. They're good businesses, because I think women have so many obstacles to overcome that by the time they get to that point, they're already great, right? They can compete on their own. They just need the opportunity to compete. What this certification does, it gets you in the door. So you work with us in our organization. We find out what kind of needs they have. This week, we're doing matchmaking all week. We just did construction and manufacturing. Next week, we're doing finance, advertising. And so we bring our corporations in, some of them from across the country, and they let us know what it is that they're looking for. And then we match those women businesses with their keywords or their NAICS codes. So I think that's a big difference, I believe, because the government, all the states, the governments, they all have certifications. Ours is probably the largest nationally known, certification, the reliable one. People trust it, just like the Minority Council and all of that. So it's a trusted women's business enterprise certification, and it goes across the country. Not only does it go across the country, we're allies or sisters affiliates with We Connect International, and that they have an international base. So we have this huge network of women-owned business. I think we have about 17,000 in the entire network that are able to work with each other, support each other. And then we have the corporations that we work with and the agencies. State of Washington is a member, and so we have other in Sound Transit. So we have in Snohomish County. So we have agencies and government agency and private corporations. I think the thing is that they trust our certification. They know that if they come through us, it's absolutely a woman-owned business. You're on mute.
If you want to put your link on Dr. Green in there too, so people know how to reach it. So you can be certified, by the way. You could be a women-owned and a minority-owned certified business. You could have more than one certification. And remember, this is when people are looking for contracts, whether it's a government or a corporation, and they want to know who to give their money to, who to invest it to. Many have commitments to spend a certain amount of money with women-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses. And this lets people know that indeed these businesses have been reviewed. They are indeed 51% or more owned, operated by women or by racial minority or by veterans, or depending on what the certification is. Well, in the last 2 minutes we have, just very quickly, a little round of, so with all this and all that's going on that we're dealing with this year with economic downturn, pandemic, dealing with serious racial reckoning, do you have hope? Andrea, you're nodding your head. So quick one from each of you, Andrea, and then Representative Senn, and then Dr. Green.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Senn made me think about this earlier, right? Like one of the reassuring things for me, especially in the nonprofit sector, is that a lot of us are in the same space of uncertainty and unpredictability. And I think what that does is encourage or forces us to explore experimenting in ways that we weren't open to before. Like there's hybrid work schedules. In terms of Byrd Barr Place, there are clients who are applying for services online now. We deployed Salesforce within the administration of our programs. We've even had the National Guards deployed to our food banks and food banks across America to support labor shortages. So I think that we are in a new era of thinking, and collectively as a society, we need to step back. We need to pause and decide what it is we want for our communities. So I'm hopeful. Thank you.
Great. Representative.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful as well. I'm hopeful that people are recognizing the value of supporting children. What we've seen from the child tax credit increase from the federal level, starting to reduce childhood poverty. What we're recognizing, the struggles for kids and their mental health, being away from school and being away from socialization. Frankly, being scared about going back to school, whether it's for COVID or around gun violence, and really understanding the long-term and deep impacts of mental health issues, understanding the huge negative aspects of foster care and the disproportionality there, and making sure that we're supporting families so that families aren't separated just because of poverty, but really only if there is abuse there. And I think people are starting to recognize that investing in kids early, in childcare, in pre-K, in the brain development, in social emotional learning is a key factor to impact lifelong equity, to make sure people are ready to learn in kindergarten and then hit those milestones that Andrea mentioned of third grade reading and graduation and moving on. And hopefully that we're encouraging people more to go into those helping professions, because we need each other. We need community. We need support. And those aren't things that can be traded away to a robot or to out of the country or anything, but that we have to come together to support each other, support our healthcare workers, support our low income workers, and hopefully raise their wages. So I am hopeful that we're at a turning point, and also because we see a lot of places where things aren't going the right way, and I think people are recognizing what's going well and what's not going well, and hopefully people will vote for those leaders who are helping it go well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Dr. Green, what about you? Are you hopeful?
I am hopeful. I'm very hopeful. And I'm hopeful because I think the pandemic has just turned everything upside down, that it's exposing a lot, the things that we've known were there. And I mean, I was actually surprised at some of the depth of the hatred and vitriol. I was surprised how deep it ran. But I think you can't fix anything unless you absolutely see it's there. I think it's all exposed. We see it. Everybody sees it. I think the world sees it. And I think that will lead us to have to do something to fix all of those ills that we have. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we can start working on taking care of all of that.
So, Dr. Green, I'm going to ask you again, though. So this is good. I agree. People always ask me, after being an activist for 50 years, why do you still do it? 2 steps forward, 1 step back, sometimes more steps back. And I always think I must be hopeful and I believe you cannot be an activist if you don't have hope.
You have to
because,
be optimistic
you know,
at some level.
You do. You say, otherwise, why am I doing all of this? So you do believe in some way. Plus, for those listening, you do surround yourself with the best people in the world when you're active in your community. And that is very uplifting during dark times, I think. So from all that we've learned going through this time, is there anything positive that has come out of this period of time, is maybe specifically around the pandemic, but any of it since the murder of George Floyd and all the other Black and brown people that have been murdered, in terms of reforms we're talking about or not reforms? Do we think that something good has come out of all that we're dealing with right now? Who would like to start? I see that you've unmuted yourself, so how about you, Representative Senn?
Thanks, Louise. I think that we are, all of us are being challenged to think about racial equity and to think about what that means, and to challenge how we walk in the world, frankly, versus how other people walk in the world and the supports that they have, and just constantly questioning our privilege, our systems. And I think, kind of as Dr. Greene said, at a time that they've never had an opportunity to really had it exposed and been forced to think about it. And I'm hopeful that people are thinking about it and seeking to make change. The other more personal thing, I would say the one positive is, I think with the pandemic, people have been forced to slow down, to really look at what's important in their lives for them, whether it's family, nature, just not being quite as engaged in the rat race, being able to stand up and say, you know what, I don't want this job. This was not the job for me. I want to make a career. I want to start a new business, and really, again, forced to do that at some point. But that has been a blessing. I know I got a few extra months with my son before he went off to college, for instance, because he didn't go to college right when he would traditionally have gone. So just looking at that bright side, that I hope people do continue to be more deliberate and reflective, whether it's for their own personal well-being or for racial equity in the community.
Andrea, what about you? Do you think some positive things have come out of this? We're not out certainly yet on the other side, but during this very difficult time.
I do. I see this level of solidarity that I haven't seen in my almost 20 years in this work. We are so used to being in these silos. We're so used to competing for resources, competing for name and lights. And there's been this attitude of less competition and more fulfilling of each other. I've seen the business community reach out more than the nonprofit community to support what our clients need. In fact, Barr Place went in the business of raising funds and sub-granting it to local restaurants last year to help keep them afloat. In fact, we supported financially Jackson's Catfish Corner coming back to the CD. We financially supported Communion opening up at 24th and Union in the CD. And so those are things that we hadn't necessarily had a footprint in the past. So I'm seeing this level of connectivity. I'm seeing that even across our ethnic and racial lines, people are coming together and wanting to practice more solidarity, to support each other, to be interested in what's happening with each other and how can we provide support there. There's been this tension in our communities of color for a long time, with native-born people of color who were born here and foreign-born people who immigrate here. And I've seen a lot more togetherness. I've also seen, again, across sectors where corporate industry is supporting government industry, who's been supporting private industry. And there's just been this sort of breaking down of what used to be, and this idea that we truly are one in this. And I hope to see that expand and continue forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea. So Dr. Greene, you mentioned also that you were, came up on age in the 60s and 70s. And I agree with Andrea in that those times, though, were very much, you had the peace movement, the women's liberation movement, the Black Power movement, the gay liberation movement. And, some people did a little work here and there and all, but mostly they were, as you said, Andrea, very siloed. So we've seen in the streets, we see the diversity of the people coming together to fight for things, although there's still plenty of infighting within each community, not necessarily across communities. But what do you think positive, Dr. Green, has come out of this period of time?
I think that, I think the awareness, I think the fact that people are coming together, I do believe that we act more collectively because we figured out we're stronger together than we are individually. So we're binding, we're binding together. I also think that I've noticed a real change in the philanthropic organizations. So like I said, I'm president NAACP here. We actually were able to get money. We set up resources so we could have computers for people. We were able to give food out for the pandemic. These were organizations that were giving us the money and letting us go to our community because we know our community better and what they need better than they do. In the past, what would happen is they would say, here's the money and here's how we want you to spend it, right? So it has been a change, I think, in the way that people give, and they're starting to understand that you have navigators in your community, you have people that trusted people in your community, and that you actually get more value by letting people run their own destinies. This was one thing. And the other is really that collectiveness. If we can continue that and have people come together, because those issues of discrimination go across the board. We all deal with it. And we know that it's something that shouldn't be there. So I think we have ways that we can ally and still get still support our communities.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think what's also, I'm going to make a plug. I'm also on the board of trustees of Seattle colleges, and the community colleges are also a great opportunity to level the playing field around higher education. And now with Seattle Promise, at least in Seattle, every single high school graduate can go for 2 years tuition free. And I hope that is duplicated on the state and the federal level. And we have apprenticeships and certificates and 2-year degrees, and now even some 4-year degrees. And you can get, and it's so important, even in the trades, there are some great living wage jobs that people who don't want an academic degree could get a certificate and be trained. So that's also, I'll put on your plate, Representative Senn, is making sure we're supporting full access to higher education so that everybody can go in our whole state, not just in Seattle. And I know we have opportunities for scholarships statewide, but sometimes that is for the very poorest. We really need it. You can be not necessarily the very poorest, but close, and you can't pay for college. It's so very expensive. Even our state schools can be very expensive. So I hope also, Representative Senn, I was going to ask you to put your contact also in the chat. So we have a representative we can reach out to. We have a social service community activist organization. We have a fund we can be investing in, which is a very important fund right now, the Black Future Co-op and Byrd Barr organization. We can find out about if we are a women-owned business to get certified, if we're a minority-owned business to get certified. And is there any other last quick action thing you think anybody should be taking here? Get involved. I hope the point of today is that there's a lot of work to be done, but it takes each of us to do just something to start making a difference. But anything anybody wants to recommend?
Well, Louise, just because you mentioned community college, I'll just say that thrilled to say that now with Fair Start for Kids Act, if you are a college student at a community college, you no longer have to work and go to school to get childcare. We have eliminated that work requirement, and that is a huge step forward. So excited about that. So if you're not going to school because of childcare, take another look.
Excellent. Very good. Anything else anybody wants to say as a closing?
In this, I'll say in this tumultuous world that we're living in, for some of us, it's deeply emotional. For some of us, it's physical. Some of us, it's both. Please be kind to yourself and be the same to others.
Great comment. I mean, I think if you want to know what should give you hope, just listen to the three women on our panel today who have spent their lives making a difference. And every time we open the paper and see all the negative things, sometimes we forget to remember in our communities, in our local communities, people every single day are out there, whether they're in the streets picketing, whether they're working for union rights, whether they're working to become a small business owner, whether they're working for racial, social justice or housing, or they remember to vote and vote for people that care about their communities and about a better world. So maybe that's the hope for today, is get involved and remember to say thank you to all the people who are engaged and are doing incredible work. People are asking whether we're going to be, our legislature will be in person or not.
I am hoping that we are at a minimum in a hybrid mode where we can, be in person and really doing the hard work, discussing each other and working across the aisle, but also keeping each other and the staff safe. So my hope is that we're in a hybrid mode at a minimum, but definitely, continuing to fight COVID is at the top of the list. And I would just say that I just hope women continue to support other women, whether it's in politics or in business or in the community or with their child responsibilities or with their health. That's just, women helping women is key. Of course, everybody else helping women too, but I just find so much support and energy from my female friends and colleagues.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you for all that you do. So Dr. Greene, any last word that you want to leave people with today?
I agree with what you're saying. I want people to know that they should be, the call to action that you had. I think that the biggest changes happen when people that are in the community each get out and do something. We get our leaders, we get people that kind of create things. They can verbalize, they can speak, and they can, they're the front people, but it takes everybody out adding their value to making the changes that we need.
So Dr. Greene, in this hard time, is it still appropriate to start a new business? What would you say to a woman that wants to start a new business now?
Cynthia was just talking about that. We're seeing a lot of women start businesses. We're seeing them start businesses because they're not going to go back to what they had. It's not worth it to them. And they have other skills. We have people, they're doing things like, doing organizing for people or bookkeeping. I mean, they have the skills. They're working in corporation. They're taking those skills and bringing them back to themselves and doing a business for themselves. So we see a lot of women entrepreneurs starting out now.
Great. I mean, people don't realize, but small business is the largest employer in the country. And often the reason so many small businesses are owned by women and people of color and the LGBTQ community is when you don't feel welcome or you are discriminated against in places of work, you start your own business. And so that's why small business owners are so connected to their community and give back so much.
Some of it's necessity. I'm sorry. A lot of it's just out of necessity.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Andrea, want to give us a closing thought? Nope, you're on.
Thank you. During COVID and beyond, I think now is time to embrace and beyond that, our lives are important and to value our lives, right? Value Black lives, value children's lives, value women's lives, value all of our lives, because as a society, we are being called on to change, whether we're ready to participate in that change or not. And so be thinking about how you want to step into making that change. At the Black Future Co-op Fund, we talk about every day, what are each of the four of us co-founders doing to be a good ancestor? And so I leave you with that. What are you doing today to be a good ancestor for your descendants?
Thank you. And Jeff, you want to close this all? Again, thank you all, especially our amazing panelists, and thank you to CityClub, and now to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. On behalf of CityClub, I also, again, want to thank Representative Senn, Dr. Greene, Andrea, for your engaging conversation and taking your generosity and taking the time today to talk to us. So also, I want a big thank you to our Civic Bootcamp sponsor, Alaska Airlines, for their generous support of this entire series and all of our boot camps. Again, thank you all. Please take care and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.